Good morning, Loa. I'm Wes Norris, and I'll be moderating today's industry hour panel. In line with this year's theme of Under Attack, Agile Logistics for the Future Fight, what the panel will be doing today is having a conversation that'll explore the various challenges that may affect the logistics enterprise today, tomorrow, and way out in the future, and a discussion on how we face them and overcome them. For today's panel, we are very fortunate to have senior leaders across industry joining us today to share their thoughts, knowledges, and experiences. We gentlemen, the LOA members, look forward to hearing your thoughts and insights on what these challenges are and how to overcome them. So what I'd like to do is basically introduce our panel members, and if you could please share some brief background about yourself, that would be most appreciated. So our first panel member is from Boeing Government Operations, is Lieutenant General Air Force retired Samuel Cox. He is the Vice President of Air Force and Space Force Systems. Sir, over to you for some words.
Thanks. First, welcome, Loa. It's good to be here with you. I wish we were all here in person instead of doing virtual, but that's just the reality of where we are today. My background, spent 33 years in the Air Force, mostly flying strategic airlift aircraft, a few different Pentagon assignments and what have you, and been with Boeing for just over a year now. So glad to be a part of this.
Thank you, sir. Next is Lieutenant General Air Force retired Bruce Litchfield from Lockheed Martin Aeronautics Company. He is the Vice President of Sustainment Operations. Sir, over to you.
Hello, Wes, and hello, Team LOA. Like Sam said, it's really wish we could do this in person, and LOA is such a great event, and the camaraderie, and quite honestly, the talk over a drink or a beverage is always the best part of it. But you do what you have to do in these times, and we've been really amazing how much we've been able to accomplish given this environment that we're in. I will tell you that I feel very, very fortunate that I had a chance to work and stand up the Sustainment Center in the Air Force, and then follow that up with what I've been able to do in Lockheed to really bridge the continuity between what's needed in terms of the services, and then bring the best of what industry can do to create the partnership that I think is really what's going to enable us to attack the challenges of the future. So I look forward to today's discussion. And I will also say this, when I look at the lineup in the LOA agenda, I think that for a team, it's really amazing how LOA really goes after what I would call the heart and soul issues of what we're going to need for the future. So thanks for letting me be a part of this one, and I look forward to this panel discussion.
Thank you, sir. Moving next to AAR Corporation, Mr. Jay Pereira is representing AAR, and he is the Vice President and General Manager of Government Services. Mr. Pereira, over to you.
Good morning, Wes, and good morning, fellow panelists. It's great to be with you this morning. I echo what the other panelists have said. I wish we could be in person, but I'm grateful that we have this opportunity to still discuss today. I'm eager to get into the content, as I think it's some of the more pressing items that are facing our industry today. I'm fortunate that across the AAR Corporation, I get to work with not only my colleagues, but the men and women in uniform across the services to ensure aircraft availability and material sustainability across the supply chain. And it's my pleasure and my honor, frankly, to do that. And I look forward to talking a little bit more in detail about what we do at AAR and how we can help LOA in these areas and subject matters. Back to you, Wes.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. And over to Mr. Jim Sutton from Northrop Grumman. He is the Director of Customer Engagement. Jim, over to you.
Thanks, Wes. Good seeing you. Sam, Bruce, Jay, it's always good to see you guys. Fellow members of LOA, I appreciate the opportunity to spend a little bit of time with you this morning. As many of you guys know, ladies and gentlemen, I am a Air Force Blue guy from the beginning. 20 years on active duty, another 13 years as a civilian, with Northrop now for 9, and enjoying the camaraderie and the partnership that goes on between industry and government. I think our topics this morning are wonderful, and why don't we just go on and get into them. Thanks, Wes.
All right. Hey, thank you. And I guess I should say a little bit about myself. Retired Air Force, 27.5 years, career aircraft maintainer, logistician, been in industry for about 7 years after I retired, holding leadership positions in Boeing, Meta Special Aerospace, and L3. And gentlemen, thank you once again on behalf of LOA for joining us this morning for this discussion. So diving straight into probably what has been the pressing issue of not only today, but the last year, and probably for the foreseeable future, maybe as not as much as in terms of impact, but I'd like to talk a little bit about COVID and the impact it's had on your organizations and what you all have done to overcome the challenges and how that may apply to the Air Force and the military as a whole. So if I'm asked, what challenges and impact did each of your organizations have, especially in continuing operations, production operations, would your organizations do to solve and overcome the challenges due to COVID? And follow on to that, what impact do you all think COVID will have on budget, if any, to help pay for our nation's response due to the COVID pandemic? So, Sam, if you don't mind, we'll go ahead and start it with you.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and start. So if you look at, clearly this is a pandemic that unprecedented, never seen this before. If you look at 2020, the airline industry at large, what has occurred with that, it's a 67% decline in passenger travel. A year ago, it was all the way down to 90% decrease from the previous year. So that has a significant impact on movement of cargo, not only just the packs, but right, so all the underbelly cargo that takes place, cargo writ large, aircraft movement has gone up significantly, more than 100% higher than what's been done in the past. $500 billion impact on the aviation industry. I mean, pretty huge impact on that. 16,000 aircraft were parked last year. Still 7,000 aircraft are parked. So that has an impact. Certainly the Boeing company, and then across the board there. But on the defense side, we clearly participate in as a part of the defense critical infrastructure. We could not, shut down everything. There were periods of temporary shutdown that did occur, but we knew that we had to continue producing aircraft and providing services and training, et cetera. So what we did essentially was make sure that the work environment was clean and safe for our employees to come in. And where there were spikes, we would take the measures if you needed to shut down a little bit more. We've decreased the number of people that are down on the factory floor, but we've made sure that the folks are safe when they come to work, whether it's the cleaning, spacing, PPE, and then also telework to the maximum extent possible. So we knew that we had to continue operations, and we have.
Thank you, sir. Bruce?
Well, Wes, I mean, I think that when I look at the COVID environment, it's hard to sometimes differentiate between how it personally affects you, how it personally affects your family, and then of course professionally and what you have to do as a job. So I will say, on the professional, I was very impressed with kind of how the reaction was, I'll say by Lockheed, by establishing the priorities. So the first priority was taking care of the workforce and making sure the workforce was safe. So a lot of things that Sam talked about, how do we socially distance? How do we go to a virtual environment? How do we take care of, the folks as incidents occurred? And to a large degree, very impressed with that priority. The second was, how do you execute the mission? In the defense business, the national security operations still took place worldwide. The ability to do training sorties, the ability to do combat sorties, the ability to do deployments, we still had to work through that. And as we saw from a COVID environment, it really took place in a wave across the globe. And when you're working in in Asia or Pacific or continent, US, how you responded to it, we had to be very flexible and adaptive. So we learned to do that. And then lastly, take care of the communities because, we wanted to make sure that our folks who live in the communities, we still gave back and were able to support in terms of the needs of food banks and the ability to take care of our first responders. So those three priorities really guided us well. And what I saw from a company perspective, we were not a telework environment. We were a face-to-face. We were together all the time. In fact, telework was a very small percentage. And then we learned to rapidly adapt. And you talk about an agile, the ability to get everybody the IT support that they needed, the bandwidths that you needed, the ability to communicate, as we're doing today with Zoom or however we needed to globally interconnect. That's what we were able to do. And then the rapid use of technology, whether it's virtual reality, from connecting the field back to our engineers. And then also the ability to do deployments in a very difficult environment. So I think we've learned tremendous amounts. So when I look going to forward and, as the vaccine starts to roll out and, as the president said that hopefully by 4th of July, we'll all be together at family picnics. As we start to know what normal looks like again, I think we're going to be better off for it. We're going to utilize those capabilities and technologies to better balance in terms of our workforce and how we get the mission done, as well as meet our customer expectations to be able to do that. So I'm pretty happy about that. In terms of impacts of COVID, we're dependent on suppliers and worldwide and global, and to varying degrees, we've had some impact. But I will tell you, for the most part, really the product has gotten out the door, and we've met, I would say, a good portion of what our commitments were. I also think that what we did is stepped up to make sure our supply chain was forward funded. So like Sam said, as people pull back because of flying or as the economy, we made sure that our critical suppliers, we did a lot of advanced payments, a lot of things that you would do to make sure our suppliers could still provide the parts and the capabilities that we needed to do our production, to do our sustainment worldwide. And then lastly, I want to say I am really impressed at the resiliency of everybody that was dedicated to the defense mission, whether it was our service members that were able to fight across the globe, whether we kept the training going, and then also the dedication of the industry teammates that showed up every day and were able to perform. So, while this is a year that I never want to go through, I would never wish it on anybody. I watch it with my kids, I watch it with the students and all that they have lost over this last year. I still am very impressed with the resiliency of how we've been able to get through. And now we look at a better future and stronger and better because of what we've been through. And when you go through it together, you become stronger together. So ups and downs, but I sure like to look at the glass half full as we come out of this and really what I would say, get the engine going again.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. Very insightful. And then moving on to Jay, your thoughts, please.
Yeah, thank you. So I think Sam and Bruce really presented a picture that we've experienced as well, and the facts are out there. I mean, from an AAR perspective, a significant amount of who we are is commercial aviation maintenance. America's largest independent MRO provider, third largest in the world. Obviously, our business had a significant impact almost overnight when COVID hit. On the government side, much as Bruce said, the mission didn't stop. So we had to find a way to continue. And AAR has hundreds of deployed maintenance, supply chain engineers, procurement and support personnel deployed all over the world, oftentimes embedded with their military counterparts. And the biggest challenge that we found there was really the health and welfare, as well as the morale of those people, our deployed staff, and their families. In many cases, our deployed staff were on rotations. A lot of the countries that they're operating in shut down, and they had to be there longer. So someone that was on a 90-day rotation in Iraq, for example, was now on a 6-month deployment, or perhaps even longer. And that obviously had significant impacts not only on that workforce who now had to still perform the mission for a much longer period of time, but also on their families. So we found ourselves in a situation where AAR had to be much more than just an employer, but an actual family that cared about the families and the second and third order effects of just that one employee on the ground. And that's probably been the biggest impact for us, is just making sure that we can keep the people that are stuck in place focused, their mental health and welfare in a good place, then also their families in a good place so that the mission can occur. I think that the two other impacts that we saw, and they've both been touched on already, are we've had some supply chain delays, particularly for some of our manufacturing in Europe. We've been able to work around that a little bit, but it has posed a challenge, particularly to some of our depot operations. The one that's probably impacted us a little bit more is the commercial shipping. We rely heavily on commercial trade routes to move military assets in and out of theater. And in many cases, we've had to get very creative in doing that. And what we found really is that we have to elongate the supply chain a little bit and take a more circuitous route to get the material to its point of use, which obviously adds time, it adds some complexity and additional risks, but also some additional costs. I think the main area where AAR has been effective there is that we were forward focused to begin with. So we had a lot of the IT tools and resources already deployed with our people. So that was easy for us. It's just finding a way to make sure that we could interconnect all those elements in that now longer chain to ensure the same delivery of service to that point of use wherever it was. And we've been overly successful, I would say, but it's certainly been a challenge for us over the past few months. As I think ahead, what this has caused us to do is think differently about supply chain, and particularly the movement of assets, the physical movement. And I think that in the future, we're gonna come out of COVID as, frankly, a more responsive organization, as well as we found some ways to, within a longer supply chain, actually cheapen or cut costs in certain areas while still ensuring the integrity of the product, the quality of the product, and obviously its end result delivery to that military counterpart, wherever in the world they may be operating.
Okay.
Wes, back to you.
All right. Thanks, Jay. I appreciate the thoughts. And Jim, over to you.
Thanks, Wes. So I know, our LOA teammates are really familiar with the acronym ATSO and the ability to survive and operate. And I think, COVID is one of those examples where, from a Northrop Grumman perspective, that became Grand Central Station for daily activities. Our crisis teams came together at the beginning. They put firmly in the front of their thought customer metrics. So the mission capability, the availability of systems, and the affordability of systems were a driver, as well as the teamwork and the teammates necessary to be able to accomplish that. I think Bruce and Sam and Jay saw the same thing on our production sides, where we needed people to come to work. Bruce described very well the types of things that we as a company went through to make sure that the workplaces were clean and safe for our people to come back to work to produce. What we also did, as I'm sure all of us, embraced, was trying to create as agile environment as possible for the people that didn't need to be physically present in a location to have the tools that they needed to continue to be successful and to perform their missions. The good news is that companies like ours collectively have strong backbones from an electronics, an enterprise shared services perspective, and many of the tools were in place, perhaps not the bandwidth, but at least the capabilities for people like us to be able to operate in a Zoom environment. It was a little unusual to begin with, a little bit unique, but most of us picked up the ball fairly quickly and moved into that environment, and it was very seamless. From an overall company perspective, from a customer satisfaction, overall performance of customer outcomes, the year ended pretty much the same as it would have been expected otherwise. One of the things that also happened to us during this time frame was one of our locations, and Bruce is very familiar with this, is our location down at Lake Charles experienced in the middle of COVID not one, but 2 direct hits by hurricanes. What that did was it taxed the system even further, not as much because it damaged the facilities themselves, but because the communities and the places where people lived, the places where they shopped, were just devastated. I mean, they were just literally, in some cases, taken to the ground. So the company as a whole had to respond not only from a COVID perspective, but more importantly, from a typical natural disaster perspective, to make sure that people had what they needed for their families so that they felt comfortable, happy, and healthy coming back to work to be able to perform the mission for our customers. Going forward, I think, Bruce said it best, we've learned a lot from COVID. There are lessons that we have learned in that process that will become part of our business forever. I don't see us going back in some respects. And in some cases, those are things that will result in substantially better performance from a customer outcomes and from a shareholder perspective. We all look forward to the day when we can do this live and spend time with each other. But the most important thing is that we've learned the good lessons from it. We fought a good fight. We've continued to be successful in terms of the outcomes necessary for the nation. We, like with everything, we pick it up, move forward. We do that survival and operation. Thanks, Wes.
Thanks, Jim, and gentlemen, thank you for the insights. Obviously, a lot of lessons learned. I like Jim's ATSO. Haven't heard that in a long time, but that was, I think, spot on. It definitely is what industry and of course DoD was doing during this environment. Before we move on to COVID, what I'd like to do is explore a little bit from a strategic implication standpoint. I sort of addressed it earlier, but I'd like to go back to it. Is how do you think this will affect our budget? The defense budget? What kind of implications will it have? Will it be short-term, long-term? Just your thoughts on that. And anyone can jump in at any time. Or I'll tell you what, Jim, we'll go back around and I'll start with you and give me your thoughts on what do you think it'll do from a budget perspective.
Well, I mean, I think we all know that even before COVID was a reality, the concept of flat to declining budgets for the defense side of the business was there. COVID has probably the greatest implications, for Jay and for Sam on the commercial side because of the downturn in the travel industries and the effects that it's had there. For companies like Northrop Grumman, it focuses the expenditure of dollars in the future. It probably causes some legacy programs to go away. It turns off some programs that are not focused on the near-peer competitor fight and the new directions from a national security perspective that were already in play before the change in administrations. The reality of it is the number of raw dollars out there from an industry perspective to do things and from a government perspective are going to be tougher. But we've all gone through this before in our lives. I mean, industry and government align have weathered changes in program priorities and things of that sort. The most important thing for all of us to do is to make sure that we keep those customer metrics first and foremost in our minds, to make sure that the nation is secure, and then optimize the shareholder value components of that from a company perspective to make sure that we make the best of the dollars that are remaining in the process. I'm very confident that we'll be able to do that. I don't believe we'll have a lot of discretionary dollars to be able to throw around, but the implementation of agile tools, using lean in the workplace, becoming more effective in what we do, will result in the same types of capabilities for the nation that we've been able to deliver all along. And COVID just simply makes it a sharper focus on the affordability dimension to those legs of the stool that are required for total performance. Over.
Thank you, Jim. Appreciate your thoughts. Jay?
Yeah, Jim, I think your comments are spot on. I think, no one's overly surprised that, we're looking at a flat budget this year. I think the current FY22 budget's around $705 billion, which is flat. And in real term dollars, that's a slight decrease. So while we face that here in FY22, as we think about beyond, is COVID really going to impact that? I guess to some extent that remains to be seen. I would think not drastically, given that there are bills to be paid and operations that must be funded. But I think what Jim said and Jim summarized, in my opinion, is exactly correct. There are going to be some legacy programs that may be affected, and that the discretionary funds that we're looking at are going to be further constrained in the future. So as it relates to logistics and supply chain, from my perspective, it's really about how do we continue to ensure service with more limited budgets and increasingly legacy supply chains. And to me, it's all about routing out costs while diversifying and enabling a supply chain to continue to produce. Wes, back to you.
Thank you, Jay. Appreciate. Bruce, sir?
Wes, I think I'll come at it from two perspectives, right? So over the last year, if you just look at what we've needed to do to take care of our nation in terms of COVID, the amount of appropriations is probably 3 or 4 times a normal appropriation from the year based our tax base, right? So we know that this is going to put stress on the economy for COVID environment. But I also do think that their national priorities writ large are going to change. And if you look at the newest national security, I'll call it a pamphlet that's just been put out, you see a much more balanced approach between, economic strength, diplomatic strength, and military strength. So that's going to put pressure on the defense budget, as well as I think the domestic agenda that's going to need to do, whether it be infrastructure or however we want to prioritize. But I'm going to go back to 8 years in the Pentagon during my time on active duty. And there's I'll call it peaks and valleys to budget that you can go back to World War II and watch the peaks and valleys occur. And when they do that, as we've gone through the year since, you see the prioritizations change. You see the focus on what is important. And what's today's world really changes is that I think the global environment for the threat that's out there, we've been involved in the terrorist threat for so long, and now the near peer threat and what it's going to take. So if I look to the future in terms of what it's going to mean, I really do believe that the interconnect, whether it's through networking, whether it's through JADO, whether it's through the ability to connect our system to deliver the capabilities and at the point of impact and bringing on the technologies that enable that, I really do think that's going to be a pretty big shift and a pretty big change to the sea state of what we're going for the future. And when I look at what our senior leaders in the Defense Department are talking about, it's really about that. It's really about how do we maximize the ability to bring effects on the battlefield, and how do we do it in a widely dispersed, widely focused global environment, so that we can do it and really hold the enemy at risk. And I really like that. I think what you're going to see is that the budget pressures are really going to really concentrate that effort. I think you're going to see a lot more coming to the future in terms of modeling and capabilities, so that when the solution that comes out of it is really going to be an interconnected capability, so that we're well postured for that going forward. It's going to be it's an environment that over history the DoD has gone through, but they've been able to respond to it every time. So I'm looking at it optimistically, but knowing we're going to go through a pretty big transition, a sea state change over the next few years.
Thank you, Bruce, for the thoughts. Sam?
Yeah, I'll just kind of continue on a little bit of the theme that Bruce was there with a little Pentagon time. So if you go back to 2010, then Chairman Mullen, the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs, said, that the most significant threat to our national security is our debt, right? And are we in that same place today? And I would say probably so. And you follow that a couple years later, in 2013, I got a chance to go to the Air Staff and be the Director of Manpower Personnel Services, DA1, and we were in a sequestered budget. We had to make some assessments about, 3 pillars. It's manpower, modernization, and readiness. Those are the 3 things that you can manipulate, right? And so it was reduce the force from 332,000 to 308.8 in a matter of about 9 months, through voluntary and involuntary programs. I don't know if that's going to happen again with a flatline budget. Maintaining those 3 pillars and trying to figure out where the right balance is what's going to happen. So I believe that today retention rates are higher than they've ever been because of the current economy. So that part of it's good. Modernization is taking place with the chief's strategy of accelerate, change, or lose. Readiness is relatively stable. I don't think you can ever be ready enough, but it's relatively stable today. So as you move forward with a flatline budget, finding that right balance between modernization, manpower, and readiness is going to be what's most important for the folks that are still on the force today. And so providing, as some of the others have already said, providing the best, most cost-effective solutions to meet the effects that are required is what we're going to have to do. Thanks.
Okay.
Hey, Wes, can I know it's not it's a discussion, but Sam used that sequestration word, which I hope no one has to go through that, because that was probably the most significant emotional event in my life, to watch what we had to do to our people. And what I really hope, if we recognize the fact that things are going to change in the future, we can do what I believe is the strength of the military, strength of our department, actually the strength of our nation. That's deliberate planning and the ability to roll into it in a much more what I would call orderly fashion than we did in sequestration. This is just a thing that said, let's not go back to that. Let's realize and embrace what our future holds, and then do it as a collective team. And I just wanted to comment on that one, Sam.
Yeah, and I agree with you there. We don't ever want to repeat that lesson again, because that was an ugly time.
There was actually an article over the weekend that was published by Matt Donovan that talked about the whole deliberate planning process and making sure that you made the right choices to begin with, and then got everybody aligned around that. So there are the things that we can do from an industry perspective to support that. But most importantly, there are hard choices and hard decisions that the services will have to make, combined with commitment by Congress and by the executive branch to follow through with it. So the real challenge to COVID is the deliberate planning and the organized process piece. And if that comes out, then as a nation, we'll survive successfully without any problem.
Thank you, gentlemen. And I think we all heartily agree regarding sequestration. That was that was a life-changing event, no doubt about that, for not only DOD, but industry as well. This is a good segue to the next subject. We're talking about budget, cost cutting, what we need to do. What I'd like to do is focus towards the agile logistics portion of the discussion, and talk about how do we think agile logistics will contribute to cost reductions and cost efficiency. How is industry working to lower sustainment costs while increasing readiness and logistics? What kind of new tech, if any, are you all utilizing to get more, an agile logistics system to lower costs, be more efficient, whether it's artificial intelligence, machine learning, digital twin, those types of new tech. What I'd like to do is mix it around a little bit. And Jay, if you don't mind, I would like to start with you to discuss and address the subjects that I just brought up.
Yeah, happy to. Thanks, Wes. Yeah, so the application of technology, particularly as it relates to AI and machine learning, has been advanced drastically under COVID, at least from our perspective. We were on the trajectory, I think, as many of our companies were, to introduce these technologies and leverage them into our business practices and standardize them. But COVID has allowed us to get a little bit further faster, which is frankly a good result. And kind of connecting my last comment, I think coming out of COVID, we'll find ways to actually be cheaper, more efficient, and more effective because of this. So from a purely AR perspective, we've been able to introduce machine learning in some of our forecasting and planning models. And that's not only adding an element of automation, but also optimization into what we're doing. And we're seeing the positive effects of that. We need to roll that out more broadly, but initial indications are very positive. AR is also working with a few partners right now to introduce AI into our maintenance practices and highly reduce the turnaround time and increase the throughput, the flow days of aircraft and depot maintenance, while actually improving the product. There's some advanced technologies that we're working with the FAA on right now to bring those to bear. They're in testing phase, but I think, again, coming out of COVID, we need to find a way to be lean with our workforce and yet increase the throughput of depot maintenance. And then the third thing I'll say as it relates to agile logistics, I think it's It's been resonant within industry for a long time that we have to maintain a posture that enables us to continue operations, particularly on the government side, wherever those military members may be, and obviously that changes. So how do we do that in a way that is that's efficient and cost effective while still employing the redundancy that's needed for some of these supply chains? And we've seen the need for redundancy in a COVID environment. And from my perspective, we've operated an element of what we call support in depth. So we have layered support rings that go from as close to the point of use as possible all the way back to headquarters. And with redundancy comes cost, obviously, and we got to be very careful about that. So we've been putting a lot of thought and time and attention about thinking about how do we be redundant enough to ensure that there are assets that are needed for that end user, as close to that end user as possible, while at the same time not introducing a bunch of life cycle costs to these assets. And that's something that we've actually been using machine learning to help us with and enable our forecasting and planning models. And obviously, COVID has changed that landscape drastically, where we used to have a layered depth approach to material management, for example, that now gets affected because the geographical layout is no longer an option for us. So we have to triangulate differently and be very responsive. And so for us, I think it's the application of the technology paired with a layered approach that is redundant enough to ensure supportability without being too redundant and introducing unnecessary costs. And then my final comment here is just on supply chain optimization from my perspective. As some of our commodities continue to age, what we're finding is DMS is a real meaningful factor for us. It's not only introducing new costs to industry, but also to the end users, but it's actually presenting new challenges for us in actually maintaining capability and supportability of an asset. So AAR is really spending a lot of time thinking about and working with our supply base to revitalize supply chains that have died or are dying. And the two areas that we see to do that are partnering with our OEM counterparts to ensure that they will work with us in providing the right tech data and IP rights to enable us to produce those parts that may be out of production. And then the second is really introducing competition into that supply base to make sure that there are enough interested people that want to get involved, that we're not seeing costs that are so outrageously high that we actually can't afford to support them in the future. Happy to go into details on any more of those things, Wes, but I'll turn the time back over.
Okay, thank you, Jay. Appreciate the thoughts. Sam, over to you.
Sure. Just a couple examples of things that we have done as a company. You know, the real example was highlighted in the fall at ATA, right? With Dr. Roper rolling out the T7. He called it the ET7, right? You know, so that's a purpose-built aircraft with provisions for growth, supportability, innovative processes, maintenance friendly, all those things that came into play. And it was because digital engineering processes, agile software development, and open mission systems are part of the basic design of the airplane. And if you compare that to traditional aircraft development, you know, it's 75% improvement in first time engineering quality, obviously saves money, 80% reduction in assembly hours, another, right? So 50% reduction in software development and verification validation processes. So significant change in how we develop and build aircraft. So that's another. At a more tactical level, use of it's called the Augmented Training Operations and Maintenance, or ATOM, on C-17s. So it's the ability to put on HoloLens glasses and merge real and virtual realities so that aircraft technicians can interact with data, other engineers, other sources of information, to whether it's for training or you can deploy and not have to send an entire team fix an aircraft because you've got the HoloLens and the ATOM technique processes that allow you to do that. So just a couple examples of things that we're trying to do to try to use some of these agile methods to make us more effective.
Okay, thank you, sir. Bruce, over to you for your thoughts.
Yeah, well, Wes, I got to start with the end in mind, right? I believe that the premise that I've held for a long time now is that the cost of readiness will determine the size of the force, and the size of the force determines how we fight and win. That is something that's within me and deep ingrained. And I've heard today General Kelly say, you know, it's not what it costs to buy a system, it's what costs to sustain a system. So I think that holds true going forward. And then when I look at that as the end in mind, we really have created what we call the flight line as our center of gravity. So the ability at the point of impact to be able to cause the effect. And if you look at the 21st century war fight, in the way that the technologies are going to have to be able to employ, I look at all the things that are going to have to happen when, to deliver effects, but those effects can't be delivered if we can't get off the ground and we can't generate the sorties to make that happen. So we got to really focus that on the flight line. So working back upstream from that, everything that we put in play is to be able to connect the digital thread from today's legacy systems, because over the next 10 to 15 to 20 years, the predominance of systems that are going to be fighting that fight are already in the inventory. Now the new systems they come along, I'll address that in a minute in the E-systems, but the real element today is how do you bring those technologies and capabilities to the current legacy fleet. So I've been very fortunate to be able to work with with our company and create the sustainment success system. And when I look at that, what are the pillars that you need to be able to do to create at the center of gravity at the flight line, and whether it's the high reliability of the weapon system and the capabilities within the weapon system, whether it's the analytics and the prognostics that go. And I'm going to talk about analytics and prognostics, not only for those weapon systems that are instrumented, but also those legacy systems that you can use statistical analysis to be able to get to very close to what you can in terms of instrumented systems. Then a high velocity supply chain. And when you talk about cost, there's three things that really drive cost and readiness. It's people, it's parts, and it's fuel. So I'll say that the fuel is something that we can address and maybe make incremental tweaks to, but the parts and what's in the supply system is really the place where I would say if you Pareto out the places that's ripe for change, that's it. And lastly, in condition-based maintenance, the ability to evolve from what I would call the Vietnam era or the fly to fail kind of construct into a more, I will say, predictive place. Now, whether you remove a part before it's broke, or whether you simply forward deploy a part in anticipation of it breaking, there's lots of concepts that you have to do. So where does analytics and machine learning come into it? And that thread between what I would consider as the flight line and the ability to do fleet management, we are really connecting through that digital that digital connectivity, machine learning, so that we know every action that takes place on the flight line, and then be able to use machine learning to tie it back to what are the causals of that, not just to understand it, but then to how do we remove it so that the problem doesn't occur, or the action request or the 107 request never has to happen. What do we do to be able to the supply chain? How do we pre-position parts knowing on what's going to happen and what's breaking? And then, of course, the demand forecasting for the future. An awful lot of, I will call it artificial intelligence and machine learning that we're applying today on the legacy systems. And then when I go forward to the future and I say engineering for sustainment, how do we be able to, in today, connect the digital thread so that when the engineer draws out the system, we can tie it all the way back to the development of tech data, the development of training, the development of the capabilities and support equipment, so that we can do a sustainment on the weapon system 1,000 times in a different environments before we've ever bent metal. And those are not things that I'm talking about that are of the future. They're talking about what we're doing today. And what's really nice about what's happening is I know the Air Force is working really hard on creating the flight line of the future. So if you anticipate what that flight line of the future is, there's things that we're doing today that enable it. I'll call it digitally enabled. And there's things that we're going to be able to support it tomorrow through digital transformation, all contained within our sustainment success system, working for engineering for sustainment to be able to create the systems of the future that are linked from start to finish. And then finally, what I would say, creating the point of impact on the flight line. And when I look at what's happening in the Pacific, as they're experimenting with the ACE, the Agile Combat Employment techniques, we're now learning real firsthand what it takes to support it in that environment, and then how we can bring the capabilities together so that we know that we can generate the sorties necessary to fight the fight of the future. So I'm pretty excited, and what I like most of all is it really is connected to what the Air Force is using in terms of their AOP, or concepts in the depots, what they're using in the supply chain to be able to do the art of the possible kind of connectivity. We're linked into that, so it's a seamless event between what the industry is being able to drive for the future and what the services, especially the Air Force, is using today to be able to go forward. And it's not just the Air Force; it's also the Marine Corps, it's also the Army, and it's also the Navy, and what we're applying through the F-35, of course, with our international partners as well. So I really like the way the future's headed, and I like the interaction that we're doing as a team to be able to get us there.
Thank you, sir. If I may peel that back a little bit in terms of industry being able to talk to DoD and vice versa. I know in the past there was an issue with a common, operating system, especially from an IT standpoint. Do we still see that challenge today, sir?
Well, I will say, Wes, there's always going to be a challenge between, the DoD and industry. I do believe there's a partnership. In my heart and soul, I believe that the strengths are with the strengths of the services and the strengths of industry. And if we can form, and what we're working to form is that partnership that really generates the best of it. I will say that when I was in the Air Force, I really tried to reach out to the industry to form that partnership, and to be able to see it through the light of how can we bring the best of both worlds together. Now that I'm on the industry side, I will tell you, Wes, I reach back all the time to try to build that bridge, and to be able to go back and go, all right, now this is how we're better together. But underpinning all that, and Sam and I were having a discussion before we started this one, it all depends on trust. And we've got to build up that trust bank between industry and the government in order to create that partnership that enables the both. And when I look at this, it's not just for Lockheed Systems, it's not just for Boeing Systems, it's not just for Northrop Systems, it's not just for underpinning what AAR brings. It's for us to be able to operate as a total industry government partnership. That I think that trust bank, if we can work through that, I don't think there's anything that can stop us, regardless of what happens to the future in budgets.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate that. Jim, haven't forgotten about you. So over to you, sir.
No worries. So my take on this is that the underlying processes that we've gone through, especially for the group on this panel, all the way back to and before TQM days, to the applications of Lean and Six Sigma in the workforce and in the workplace, to now Agile DevOps and things like that, have marked our transition and our maturing through the information age. One of the things we as a company have done is embrace that in sort of what I'll call cross-cutting campaigns and capabilities in quantum computing, AI, ML, live virtual constructive training with augmented reality, merged reality, secure processing, and that sort of thing, to make sure that those electronic tools are there and available for us inside the company to be successful, but also for our customers to be successful in reducing total ownership costs for their platforms, making them affordable. The real issue, though, to me, has always been the change management piece around people. Whether it's the company and the people inside Northrop Grumman and their adaptability to cloud computing and systems like that, which things like COVID have forced us to pay more attention to, or whether it's from a customer standpoint, it has to be welcome, and it has to become part and parcel of the way that we operate day in and day out. It's easier to do that for new systems. So if something is digitally engineered from the ground up, for us, that's GBSD and it's the B-21 Raider. It is a more straightforward task. To Bruce's point, the reverse application of this for legacy systems and pulling legacy systems into the fold and doing that, and then having the change management pieces in place so that the maintainers, the rank and file folks on legacy Boeing, Northrop, and Lockheed systems can pick up those digital twins, the digital threads, move them into place, and then reduce that, where I'd say the other way around, increase that tooth to tail ratio so that the costs associated with maintenance are reduced, is what's critical from a warfighter perspective. The other thing that, and I'll just kind of close with this, is that because we've made ourselves so dependent on information systems and their applications, the day-to-day paying attention to cyber resilience for all of those systems is critically important, whether it's through multi-level security platforms, the kernels that we use to protect those types of systems. The reality of it is that if we pull the plug on the information systems that have become so important to digital engineering and the application of digital sustainment rules, if that stops for any reason, if there's intrusion by a state or a non-state actor into that, it has a catastrophic effect on the nation's ability to defend itself. So, while we're doing all of these wonderful things at the high level on the front end, we have to also pay attention at home to make sure that it's safe and secure. Over.
Thanks, Jim. Actually, that was a perfect tee up to segue into the next question. But before we go there, does anybody else want to add additional comment? Okay. So, like I said, Jim, a perfect segue. And what I'd like to discuss is basically future challenges to, the logistics enterprise, to its agility, and how it's going to support. And Bruce mentioned this earlier, ACE, the Agile Combat Employment concept, which is coming online. So, to formalize the question, in the next 5 to 10 years, what do you all see as the biggest challenges that the commercial and military logistics enterprise will face in providing support, to the warfighter, especially under ACE? Do you see it as workforce availability, decreasing industrial base, raw materials, as Jim mentioned, IT, cyber challenges, threats, et cetera? So what I like to do is, Sam, I'll start with you, if that's okay, sir.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, as you look, so I'll hit up a couple of different categories. The workforce aspect of it, clearly the pre-COVID environment, we were stressed with numbers of maintainers in the Air Force, and then as well as some aircrew issues as well. But, so that's kind of stemmed the tide. As I said earlier, retention rates are so high at this point that it's not a challenge, but I think that's going to happen again. And so as we try to make sure that we have a workforce that's not only inside the Air Force, that part of it, but then also in industry, how do we take the folks that are coming out of the Air Force and make sure they have the right FAA certificates, et cetera. And then I know Boeing right now is working very closely with tech training schools throughout the country to make sure that there is that kind of a training program that exists. So getting the right skills. The legacy piece that Bruce talked about earlier, I think that's very important as we try to make sure that all the weapon systems that, in my view, it's, sometimes people look at it as legacy. That's just the age of the platform. Reality is, I think it's the relevancy of the platform. So helping to make sure that those platforms, in my case, whether it's a KC-135, a C-17, a B-52, as they're continuing to be used in the United States Air Force for 3 to 5 decades, we need to make sure that whether it's the information and connectivity that's taking place with those platforms, or it's diminishing supply sources, all of those pieces have to come into play to make sure that whether it's we're solving that with additive manufacturing, printing parts at the point of need, whatever it is, to make sure that those platforms remain relevant going forward. And then you hit on it just a little bit, the standardization, whether it's the software itself or just standardization across all of the PEOs to make sure that there's a common language that all of them, all the weapon systems can talk to each other, especially as we get into this JADC2 environment. And a lot of times we talk about the JADC2 and it is space assets, it's airborne platforms, it's radars, it's all those things that come into it. But reality is underneath all of that is agile logistics and making sure that we can support all those things. So the what I would say to the folks that are attending LOA, you need to be in the middle of this conversation about JADC2. It's not just folks that are flying an airplane and shooting something. So anyway, that's what I would say for the next 5 to 10 years. We need to be engaged in that conversation as logistics professionals. And then also we need to focus on those 3 areas of workforce, legacy platforms, and standardization.
Thank you, Sam. Jay, over to you.
Yeah, I think to follow up on that and to pick up on some themes that Jim mentioned in his last comments. You know, for me, as I think about ACE in the future, to me, it's all about integrating and leveraging data to be efficient and to be agile and responsive. And so as I think about how we do that, you know, where does that data reside? And today it doesn't reside in one system, and I don't think it ever will. But how do we take those data threads and move them from one stovepipe to another across the enterprise to ensure that we can actually use that timely to make decision making? And that definitely is a partnership between industry and the government. And within that context, then the security element is absolutely crucial to get right. And I think that we need some standardization around those elements as an enterprise before we can fully achieve a positive result there in the future. But I think that the ACE concept in the future will be dependent upon this issue. The second element related to that in my mind is also this massive amount of new data that we're creating through the application of some of these other technologies that we're introducing. You know, we talked about AI and machine learning a bit. And from my perspective, there's data sets that are being created overnight that never resided anywhere else in the future. And we'd be foolish to think that an adversary isn't going to try to exploit that. And so how do we ensure that that's secured and then also leveraged in a broader context to make smart decisions in the future? The other thing I'll say in the reverse end, of looking back into our supply chain, particularly on legacy systems, it's really important that we ensure that our sources of manufacture have the latest technologies and the access to the latest drawings and tech data that they need to ensure that they can achieve the results that we're all looking for. I think that Sam mentioned that you know, ideally in the future we'll have additive manufacturing at the point of use. That'd be fantastic. I certainly think that's in our future in the next 5 years or so. I'm not sure I see that in a standardized format, but until that point, our sources of supply and manufacture need to make sure that they've got the tech data and the information that they need to ensure that the part integrity that comes out on the back end is exactly what it needs to be. And we've seen that there's been some weakness there, especially on legacy systems where some of that data may be lost. And how do we recreate that in a timely fashion? And it goes back to the partnership. And that partnership in my mind is threefold. One, with the government, the end user itself may own that data, or certainly needs the end product. Second is the OEM that originally created that. They absolutely have a crucial role to play. And then third is that supply base, and I would include AR in that. Either we're making the parts or we're looking to a vendor to do that for us. We all have to be aligned and make sure that we're sharing the data necessary to ensure that end user has what they need when they need it. Wes, back to you.
Thank you, Jay. I appreciate the thoughts. Jim, over to you.
Thanks, Wes. Yeah, so I think I pulled the same threads that Jay pulled and also that Sam pulled in this. I mean, the bottom line for me as we look forward is the building blocks. It's the Legos that pull this together. It's people, processes, and tools. So the real issue has to be, and how do we optimize that? You know, one, hiring the right types of people, making sure that they have the appropriate training, the appropriate clearances, and also the appropriate leadership to encourage them to take risks in a way that allows us to bend the curve, if you will, on sustainment, especially in an agile and in a combat environment in a deployed sense. The process piece of it is something that is a constant. We're constantly fighting the ideas of and what's pejoratively called larger government. But the most important thing is to make sure that there's a value add thread that comes back to availability, capability, and affordability for the warfighter. And then inside the company, support the shareholder value if you're as you do that. So we tend to allow regulations, bureaucracy, policies to build on top of each other and grow without ever coming back to them and asking yourself whether or not they're relevant to the fight. So that's one of the tests that has to be there. The other piece we talked a little bit before about is in an information age, the IT systems, and writ large, all the things that go into that, whether it's the training of people or the communications back and forth, have to be as robust as they can possibly be. But borrowing a little bit Sam's comment from JADC 2, there has to be edge processing. So what we can't do is get ourselves into a system where there's this large data pipe and a repository that's necessary to get back to some cloud somewhere in order to be able to do things. Organizations and individuals have to be able to stand alone where they are and make timely decisions on the sustainment of platforms, both from a cost perspective, as well as from a technical performance and a timeliness perspective to meet the mission needs. The old saying is, the decisions delayed are not decisions at all, and they have major consequences to what we do. I guess kind of closing in this is, we're here as an industry panel. Industry brings an awful lot to the table that is sometimes underappreciated by the processes that are put in place by government. The underlying acquisition tools are of limited availability or limited use sometimes to be able to take advantage of the industry partner participation in these programs. And I think that's one of the process reinventions that we need to look at. And if it drives needed changes in policy or in regulation or even in law, we need to insist on that to make sure that the warfighter has the ability to pull a best actor to the front to be able to deliver that capability in a timely way. If along the way, those are things that we find are core in a core logistics sense and have to be preserved from a inside the government standpoint, at least then what that does is it gives us the time for government to be able to create that capability internally, rather than waiting for it to come for long periods of time while having the existing capability in industry sitting on the sidelines because it's not part of the flavor of the day. So I guess my challenge mostly is to make sure that we use all the tools that are in this national industrial base, in the innovation base, if you will, to use the term from the National Defense Strategy, to bring capability to the warfighter and to do that agile combat employment of logistics and sustainment support. Over.
Thank you, Jim. Appreciate the thoughts. Bruce, sir, over to you.
Wes, you described the challenges of what LOA is really addressing in this conference, and I think it'd be pretty exciting to be in uniform right now, or to be part of the DoD, to look to the future as to how you're going to handle it. I also think it's pretty exciting in industry, and I really guard against being that industry guy that would tell the folks in uniform how to fight. I do believe that the ability to fight and how to plan for that fight and how to prepare for that fight, that belongs in the uniform, the DoD. And that really, when you talk about the partnership, then industry helps them solve, once they determine how best to defeat that enemy, the peer competitor in the ACE environment. I think that's where an industry can bring solutions to it. So let me say it this way. I believe if I could write the game right now, I would say, let's do a war game, a sustainment, no kidding war game that says, this is how you fight in the fight of the future. And this is what you need to be able to sustain and launch platforms and get the capabilities to the fight. And let's look at all the underpinnings, just as you described, right? Contested environment, cyber, supply chain disruption, the ability to be forward deployed in very small unit sizes, and the ability to do that across a huge spans. Put it all on the table, and then let's figure out what are all the challenges, and then iterate together in terms of what it takes to be able to solve that across the full spectrum of what technology, what capabilities, what tactics, what procedures, what ability to help do that. I mean, that is really the underpinning of when I talk about the sustainment success system and engineering for sustainment, and to do it for tails like the F-16, or whether it be the F-35, or whether it be the C-130, the transport, the mobility, even in the tanker arenas, the bomber arenas, we've got to all do it together And that's where I think when I talk about a partnership between bringing the best of government, being the best of industry together, that's how I would love to be able to get inside the arena and say, here is our opportunity to see what that industry government partnership can be, what solutions we are able to bring. And this is one thing that I will say across the board is when we talk about agile and we talk about the ability to deliver solutions, earlier this week for LOA, we had our 2 education with industry officers, Captain Kara Clark and Captain Mitch Babaki, talk about what they've learned in terms of agile being with industry and the ability to turn on a dime, to be able to apply resources, to be able to create capabilities that in very short order have been now realized by the field. So as we look at the 21st century warfare and we look at what we're trying to do to be able to sustain that war fight, how do we do it in a way that we go, let's allow, the brain power within LOA, the brain power within the logisticians that are going to be able to have to prepare and actually execute should we have to go, execute the fight. And then bring that technology and bring that interplay together in a way that creates the tactics, techniques, and procedures that allows us to be successful. When I think of the fight of the future, I go back to the near-peer fights of the past, much different, right? It was much more of a European kind of environment. Now we're talking about very fluid. Now we're talking about interconnected. Now we're talking about the ability to be able to bring capabilities and capacities that from all over the globe. That will require us to work together in a way that we've never done before. So there is a culture change that has to happen. There is the trust that we have to build up. But if we start from the same problem space, if we start from the same goals, the common goals that we share together that we want to be able to be successful for, I think we have a real shot at putting together a plan. And we talked about deliberate planning earlier, that creates what I will call the industrial base approach to how we're going to fight to the future. And to me, I don't want to I'm not trying to define how we fight. I want to be able to define how some of the solutions that we can be able to achieve, giving the capabilities and technologies to be able to win. And that's what I hope that we can come out of LOA and say, this is the first step in creating that partnership that makes us successful in the future, Wes.
Sure. Thank you. Appreciate the thoughts. Sounds like there needs to be a sustainment flag in the future.
Yeah. So one of, if you look at some of the things that Transcom does, right? So they're in the process of doing this. It's a study. It's called REAL. It's a Resilient Expeditionary Littoral Logistics. Yeah, REAL. So they're doing a study that although it's sea lift, it's about how do you establish fuel capacity and refueling operations at sea in a A2AD environment, right? And I think that's exactly what Bruce is talking about in a much, much broader perspective. So we need to take a clean sheet approach to this entire problem set to make sure that we understand all of the challenges that we're going to face and come up with some solutions. And I agree with Bruce. It's absolutely necessary to be between the department and the industrial base to be able to solve that.
Thank you, sir. Well, gentlemen, unfortunately, I think we are out of time or coming close to it. Before we close, what I'd like to do is provide you all an opportunity to give some parting comments to LOA before we wrap this up. So I'm not going to go around the horn real quick. Just if you have any thoughts, feel free to chime in, and then we'll go ahead and wrap it up. So anybody have any closing thoughts?
Yeah, Wes, let me start. So
right.
the one thing I would say is that, and I want to kind of pull the thread and give some credit to Bruce here. So we've talked a little bit ambiguously about the term partnership, but the mechanism is in place, and all of us as major industrial partners have enterprise public-private partnerships in place today as tangible documents between the Air Force Sustainment Center and our companies. The statements of work, if you will, in a broad sense of the goals, allow us to attack all the things that we've talked about today together. I would leave the LOA team with the thought that it's a significantly underutilized asset. And all of those agreements were signed under Bruce's watch. He's the one who created the pull function, the demand function to our CEOs at the time to accomplish that. Ours in Northrop goes back to late 2013, early 2014. And I think we have to pull that to the front and utilize it better for the outcomes that are necessary for the warfighter. Over.
Okay, thank you. Sam, sir?
Well, just for the folks at LOA, I just say, what you do matters. Keep learning and keep leading. That's it.
Thank you.
Wes, I just simply say this. I love my time in uniform. I wouldn't give it up, trade it for anything. I will also say I love my industry brothers and sisters that I come to work with every day. And what I would like to see is that bridge of trust and confidence that goes back and forth across that bridge to be able to create the future that we all want to have. The challenges that are in front of the folks in uniform and the folks that are on service the DoD today are immense and beyond anything that I ever had to face. And I look forward to helping be able to provide the solution sets that gives you the air power solutions you need to dominate, not only today, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, and working together, we can make that happen. Let's build that bridge. Let's build that partnership. Let's create the environment for success based on common goals, and there will be nothing that can stop us in the future. So thank you for the time. LOA, congratulations on a successful conference, and I look forward to working with you in the future.
Thank you, sir. Jay?
Yeah, thanks. Just real quickly for LOA, great to be with you again. Wish we could be with you in person. Yeah, my final comment is simply this: I don't think we've completely realized yet what life looks like and what the ramifications are of COVID as we're coming out of it, and I'm eager for us to be fully out of it. And so, from a LOA perspective, I just challenge you to think critically about what do the next steps look like, and not even 5 years down the road. What does the next 24 months look like for us, and how do we need to think and act differently? And I would say your industry partners are here to help you. In some sense, the commercial nature of who we are and our businesses enable us, or sometimes cause us to see some of these ramifications earlier. And I think you've heard it from all the panelists that partnership matters, and we're here to help enable you to be as successful as possible. Thank you. Wes, back to you.
Thank you, Jay. Gentlemen, on behalf of LOA, thank you for your time, your insights, and your thoughts are invaluable to the LOA, and hopefully it will challenge them to think differently, especially in today's environment, tomorrow's environment. Think about the challenges, how to overcome them, and they have to realize, and hopefully LOA will realize, that industry is always there to help. Bruce has eloquently stated, there needs to be a trust built. I think that is happening. And, together, I don't think there's any challenges we can't overcome. So on that note, thank you very much. Marty, over to you.